we rushed to the hospital. And the whole way there, I'm just praying. I'm just, God, please, please don't take this baby. I mean, it's one thing to think you're hurting yourself or you're not hurting anyone. It's a whole nother thing to see you're hurting your wife. And it's a whole different level to think that you've murdered your child that's unborn because of your actions. And that's what I was thinking at the time. I was thinking that I literally was going to be responsible for the murder of my son because of the trauma that I put my wife through. And that was something that, whether that happened or not, I knew in that moment that I would never be the same. And I went to God and I started praying and I said, God, please, please help me. I promise I'll do whatever it takes.
Today we have on the show Ian Koniak. Ian runs his own sales coaching business. Before doing that, he was one of the top salespeople at Salesforce. He's closed millions of dollars in his career, been very successful financially. He's had a lot of problems along the way in his own personal and spiritual journey. One of the things he's going to be talking around is porn addiction and sex addiction. It's a topic that hasn't come up on the show yet, so I'm excited to dig into it. And I think this topic of porn addiction is something very important. It's something I think that's getting worse in our society. So I'm excited to break it down today and how we can tackle it. Ian, so you're in a kind of similar profession to me. You're in the world of sales. You've been very successful in sales, but even when you were chasing some of these material targets, doing very well from a financial perspective, you were still feeling like quite empty in certain elements of your life. So I was wondering if we could take a step back to that period and start with that and talk around what were some of the challenges you were facing like in the background, despite having some of this material success.
Yeah, it's a great question. So just to give some context, I've been in sales about 20 years. So I started in 2003 when I got my first sales job. And, my whole life was really centered, and the reason I got into sales was centered around making as much money as I could and providing, a dream life for myself and my loved ones. And that started with a very young age. And I before I got into sales, I was a teacher. Interestingly, I lived in South America and I taught English for a year. And during that year, I ended up falling in love. I was in Venezuela, studying abroad. And when my visa ran out, I had to leave the country with no money, no girlfriend, and no job. So I went from this like high of highs to this low of lows. And I'm like, well, how can I continue this relationship? And I quickly found out that sales was going to be a great profession for me. And I ended up, selling copiers door to door. And it was very fulfilling because my goal was to bring this woman from Venezuela to the US and pay for her college at 23 years old. And I did that. Within a year, I had her in and I had a lot of success and hit my goal. And then I got cheated on. And it was like, just the ultimate betrayal. I sacrificed everything. We had been together for 4 or 5 years and she was living with me. And I thought I was going to marry this woman. And I go back that far because that's what kind of like changed my course. Sales was always about, for me, providing for others. And then when I didn't have anyone else to provide for, it became just about the ego, specifically about making as much money as I can and being number one. So money and recognition became and status, really just the praise of other people. That became my goal. And I had a tremendous amount of success in my, I'd say my first 10 years or so in sales. But I was behaving very badly. I was heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol and sex and, had a ton of money, but was partying my head off on the weekends and just really, and having a lot of near encounters where I shouldn't be here, frankly. One of them, I crashed into a tree, pissed drunk on my way to a strip club when I was 26 years old and, going 60 miles an hour into a tree and somehow walked away because I think I was so drunk and loose that I didn't get injured. And I just had all these encounters like that throughout my 20s. And then I meet my wife and I decide I want to straighten it up, right? And become a better man. And I'm still in sales, but now I'm providing for her. And that changes the course. It's not just about making money and partying it and pissing it away. It's about doing something for my family. And that became a guiding light, a guiding principle for me. But even as I was making a lot of money and doing better, and, really, I started to, I'd say between my 10th and 15th year in sales, I started to really get to this like elite level of sales where I got into Salesforce. I became their number one account executive. There was a void in my life. And I go back to like 2016, 2017, probably 6 or 7 years ago. And I was making $1 million a year. And yet I kept thinking to myself, is this it? Even though I've gotten everything I always wanted. I have this dream house, dream wife, dream job, top of my game. I felt this void inside of myself. And it was like I was always chasing and always searching. And even when I got to the top of the mountain, it didn't deliver what I thought it would in call it a 15-year pursuit of getting to the top of the sales game. So that's kind of where my life started to take a big change. And I'll go into detail, but I'll just pause there. It's the feeling of always going after and thinking that what you're going after is going to make you happy. And then you get it, and it doesn't.
Yeah, there's obviously that quote that, like, life's about the journey. It's not about the destination. But your story is kind of an eternal story that you hear, whether it's like athletes who get to the pinnacle of their career and then they retire and they're not sure what to do with themselves, they have that void, or it's like an entrepreneur or a salesperson, like you says, has these material targets, they get there and they're not sure what to do. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's sometimes this emptiness when you reach your goals?
I think that whenever you're pursuing extrinsic goals, money, status, recognition, materialism, it will never deliver, because there's always another level. There's always another, person that's doing better, another, another level. And then you have to start all over again. So it's like all this chasing and you don't enjoy the journey. Like you said, I think it's also a spiritual void, right? If you don't have a clear sense of identity and who you are, a clear sense of purpose, and a clear clarity about where you're going. You're really just chasing like the current year or the current day or the current quarter. Whereas if you have a life clarity on like who you are and what you represent, then even if you hit your goals or you don't hit your goals, you're going in the right direction. And I just didn't have that clarity. It was like more of like 1 year at a time, let's go. And I didn't look forward to like, is this really what I want to be doing with my life? Is this serving my greatest purpose? And then the third reason is, I would say, a lack of faith. For me, I did not have a strong connection with God. I did not have a sense of greater purpose spiritually. So there's the life purpose, there's the spiritual sense of self, and there's the short-sightedness that all kind of contribute to that void that people feel in pursuit of a very short-term extrinsic goal. Whereas the growth goals, the spiritual goals, and the clarity of self and knowing who you are and then being aligned on that, those are all intrinsic goals. Those are all centered around who you are and how to really live to your full potential and fulfill your destiny here. It's bigger than just you. And so I think that's the main reason people feel the void when they're chasing those type of goals.
Wanted to take a step back to like earlier what you were talking about, related to like alcohol, drugs, sex, this lifestyle that you had before. And a couple of months ago, we had a guy on the podcast called Michael Chapman, and he was actually talking around how sometimes you think you want a certain amount of money, but you're actually not ready to make that amount of money because you haven't got that life experience to know what you're going to do with that. So in terms of like sex, alcohol, drugs, etc., was it actually a gradual process? The more money you were making in that period, the more you're actually going into those vices, or how did that work?
I think I struggled with that even before I had a lot of money. Honestly, I think for me, it was more of a genetic and more of a, like, I remember in college, before I had any money, before I was going and getting very successful in sales, I had a little bit of money. I worked, and let's just say I partaked in illegal activities during college, and I had a little extra money in my pockets. And as I mentioned, I lived a very addictive, risky lifestyle. And I lived in Australia for a year in college. I studied abroad there. And I remember some weekends I would go out with some friends Friday night, and then instead of going home at 1 or 2 in the morning, I would go to the casino, which was open 24 hours, and I would gamble. And there was one night where I went in Friday night and I didn't come out until Sunday morning. I literally spent all night the next night and then came out and it was Sunday morning. So I just think that genetic like addiction gene is very strong. I think my dad struggled with addiction, my brother, my grandpa, my whole family's had that. And I think that's a big part of it. And then you add money to the mix, and then it's like, oh, I can get whatever I want, and that's really dangerous, when it comes to like indulgence with drugs and alcohol and sex. You get this kind of like power feeling of like, I have money and therefore I can pay for, anything. And it just becomes this, whether it's buying drinks for everyone, whether it's like literally paying for drugs, whether it's sex or, the type of relationships that are material in nature leading to sex, or whatever it is, there is this behaving badly that can come from having too much money and not being mature. That certainly, for a single guy in his mid-20s was, for me, I didn't have the restraint to recognize that. And, until I crashed into the tree, I really had no self-control around it either. And that kind of woke me up a little bit, but it certainly didn't wake me up fully. That was just kind of like, the beginning of awareness for me that this was probably not a sustainable lifestyle to live.
So you said that was one moment, crashing into the tree. And then I think you said when you met your wife as well. So what was it about your wife or like meeting her that also changed your perspective?
I mean, when I met my wife, I was pretty, I'll just call it how it is. So I had a sex addiction, right? I used to go to strip clubs and massage parlors, and just kind of like, when I was single, I didn't think it was a big deal. It was like, I was pretty traumatized by getting cheated on. It happened in a really, really bad way. And it happened right under my neck, and I was gaslighted for months. I kind of thought something was going on and she was lying to me. And at that point, I just said, screw women. If this is like, I worked so hard and it was just so hurtful. And so I started looking at women as sexual objects, much like many men do. Honestly, I think pornography and the culture of porn and what we see pervades and encourages this view of women as it objectifies women. And that's why I've given up porn for over 3 years, at least one of the reasons. But back then I didn't. I was definitely, I would say my goal was to go out, to get drunk, and to try and hook up with as many women as possible. And if I couldn't do that, then I would go to the strip club. And it became this kind of like, again, to your point, like drunk, alcohol, wild women, sex, money, and this crazy kind of lifestyle that you think of as rock stars. I mean, that's how I was living my life in my 20s. And I'm not ashamed of it, because at the time that's who I was and what I knew, but I'm proud to have emerged from that lifestyle. In 2010, I meet my wife, and I'm still very much in this lifestyle when I meet her. And she just blew my mind. She was like soft-spoken, beautiful woman of faith. She was Christian and, a strong believer. And I met her at a Tony Robbins convention. She was my firewalk partner. So that was a sign that, for me, that God is real, and that my life was, there's so many of these moments, but that was one of the defining moments. And Tony asked us a question, when we got partnered up, and I partnered up with her, and he asked a question. He said, what's the one thing you need to do right now to live the life you deserve? And I remember my wife, Sandy, who at the time had a big ring on her finger. She was still married. And she looks at me and she starts crying with these puppy dog brown eyes. And she says, I need to divorce my husband. And then she proceeds to tell me how he was an alcoholic, and how he was arrested multiple times, and how he neglected her, and, you know, she'd be up waiting and wouldn't know where he is, and just like pouring her heart out to me. And I'm just thinking to myself, I can give this woman such a better life. She deserves so much better. It's like I was like looking into her soul at that time. It was pretty magical. And that was kind of like my cue. It turns out they were separated. She had just moved out from him, and she knew she needed to divorce, but it was very fresh at the time. But anyway, we stayed in touch. I started dating her, and it was like this thing, like, I can be better. I can be the man she deserves. You know, she's come out of this horrible relationship. So that was definitely like a crux for me to like try and not only be aware that the way I was acting was not okay, but also that if I wanted to be with a woman like this, I would have to change, because there's no way that she would be with me knowing what she, you know, if she knew everything about me and how I was living. So that to me was like kind of, and it also took up my time. Like I wasn't going to the strip clubs and partying, because on the weekends I was hanging out with her, and I was like spending all my time and energy with her. I was in love, madly in love. And so this pattern of what I was doing every weekend now started to subside. It didn't go away, but it started to subside quite a bit by nature of spending more time with her and putting all my attention and focus on her, but also by nature of wanting to be better, because I didn't want to be the, you know, like her ex-husband. And I didn't want to, I wanted to make, like, keep my promise of giving her the life that she deserved.
So she was almost, in a way, you wanted to be a better person because of her, to serve her.
It's still the same way. Yeah. That's been she's been very consistent throughout my, you know, my whole journey. But that was kind of one of the defining moments, but it didn't end there. I mean, honestly, what ended up happening was for 10 years. So I met her in 2010, and then I got sober from compulsive sexual behavior in 2020. So for 10 years, I was still like watching porn and going to strip clubs and acting out, but it was very like secretive. You know, it was this thing that I wasn't doing maliciously. It was more like I had an addiction, and I hadn't dealt with it yet. And I did it a few times a year, not to downplay or minimize it, but I didn't think, because I was in denial, I didn't think what I was doing was so wrong, because I wasn't cheating on her or having affairs. I shouldn't say I wasn't cheating on her. I wasn't having affairs or having girlfriends, or what society says is cheating, right? But now I have a new and understand what cheating really is. It's doing things in secret that your partner's not okay with, right? That's the cheating that I had been doing. And then I had another defining moment in 2020 when I got sober, and I'm happy to share what my rock bottom was, but that was what really changed my trajectory and took me on this course of more of a spiritual awakening. And that's where I've been ever since, where life has really started to make sense, and frankly, has been a lot more fulfilling and happy for me and my family.
Yeah, so I'd like to get into that. I've got a question first. Maybe this is going to be related to the 2020 part, because I'm not sure what's going to be in that. But I think this topic of what you're talking about before, porn addiction, is a big, and I think it's going to be a bigger and bigger problem as we're living in this digital age. So how did you, I guess a couple of questions here, which is like, one, how did you first identify that like the porn was an issue? And then two, what did you do about it?
Yeah. So I'll just tell you, it's we can bucket sex addiction as porn addiction, or we can bucket it as a broader addiction of sex, right? And they're very interrelated. So I say sex addiction because it could be I'm addicted to hookup apps, and I hook up and I objectify women and I never call them, and that happens over and over again. And I have friends who are very successful that have been single, and that's all they do, and they never have any meaningful intimacy. And they're by every definition sex addicts. And so it goes beyond porn. There's massage parlors all over the country. There's prostitution and websites that promote prostitution and escort services. And I have men call me on a weekly basis when I share my story, confessing that they're struggling with these type of issues. So I'll bucket porn, webcams, OnlyFans, massage parlors, prostitution, strip clubs, and hookup apps all in the same bucket for the sake of this, because it all interrelates very much. It's in the origin is porn. The cell in the internal heart comes from porn, because a lot of times men, and I can't speak for women, I know there's women who struggle too, but I can speak for men, are exposed to porn in a very young age, and that starts to inform their psyche. So I always knew I had a problem. I was exposed to porn when I was 12 years old, and it came at a time when my parents separated, when I had a lot of like childhood trauma, and that became comforting to me. And I didn't realize this at the time. I realized it after a lot of therapy and kind of going back to the origin of where this all started, but started when I was 12 years old. And I think that's the case for a lot of men, is they're exposed to porn at a young age, and that becomes the center, like hooking up. What they see looks really attractive, and so they want to do those things. And I think now more than ever, it's a problem because I didn't have a cell phone when I was in middle school, and this stuff wasn't accessible. You know, we had to get magazines and VHS tapes, but now it's a whole different level. And so that becomes the norm. And then they take that to relationships, and then, you know, want to objectify women and do things that frankly are not normal because they see it in porns. And so that's kind of how I was exposed. And what ended up happening, that kind of like, I remember on my 18th birthday, I went to a strip club with some friends, and the concept of being able to pay women and have them get naked and, you know, go on your lap and like give you this sense of like you're a man. I mean, it was all fantasy, it was all illusion, but it felt pretty real. That kind of took it to I'd say from a digital level to a physical level, right? It took me from this fantasy to, wow, this can happen in reality. And then in college, you know, I'm not kidding. Like I've always liked massages, and I didn't even know any better. I went to a massage place, literally a block from my house. And then there was a lineup of women when I came in lingerie, and you could literally pick the one you wanted. And I'm like, holy shit. And this is college, you know, I'm drinking and partying. And I know now at the end of the night, I could go into this place and have what I wanted. So it was this kind of weird power of money thing that I was telling you earlier, that interwove with alcohol, drugs, and sex, where if I didn't hook up, I had that as an option. So the goal was always to meet a woman and to hook up, because that's what I was like going after because of what I saw in the porn. But once I discovered the physical world, that was literally everywhere. And it's crazy because there were people lined up to go in these places. And then I go to Australia, and it's there too. So now it's this world of like prostitution. And I'm not saying like I did this every weekend, but you know, here and there, that was an option. And then I would say that proliferated, where I always knew that was an option. So if I go traveling across the world, you know, I'd find myself in situations where, you know, I go to a strip club, but it was also, you could take them home or whatnot. So again, I share some of these things because this was deep rooted. This started in my childhood when I was 12 and evolved into the land of drugs and alcohol. And that just became part of the recipe of hedonism and of self-gratification. And it started with porn. So I think I knew I had a problem like in my, I'd say early 20s, college years, early 20s, because then I continued to want to go to the strip club. It was like this trigger in my brain when I would get drunk or I would get high, I would think of that, right? It would automatically trigger the desire for women. I need to hook up. I need to see women. And then I knew I could go to a strip club or something. And so I kind of like, I would say at first it was a financial thing. It was like, I don't want to waste money here. What's wrong with me? But then it became more of I'm objectifying women. It became this thing where I'm like, why should I even bother dating? I can just get the milk for less than what it costs to go on a date and to wine and dine. It was like this, my brain was literally changing how I viewed women as sex objects. And I'd say a lot of men, single men especially, struggle with this. The majority of them actually that I talk to have this objectification. The goal is to hook up, and these hookup apps have made it worse and worse, but that's not how intimacy is built. That's not, and if you think you have this problem and then you get married, you think the problem goes away. It doesn't. It's just kind of like simmering in the background, right? So I first went into therapy for what I perceived, what I said, I told my therapist was a strip club addiction. I said, I'm addicted to strip clubs. I didn't know it was sex addiction or porn addiction. I mean, I was going on webcams back in 2006, 2007, where it just started, and I would pay women to like strip on the webcam. And now there's these sites like OnlyFans where now it's like massively, I've never been on that, but I've heard about it, where it's like massively popular and it's just normalized. And what's so perverse about this and what's so sick and twisted, and I use these words on purpose, is it's wiring your brain to think of women this way. And most of the time, I can't say all of the time, but most of the time, men in relationships are still doing some of these activities if they've struggled with it before. So that's what led to my rock bottom. And I'll just continue on this path because we're there, is I was going on webcams. And I had consciously made an effort in my marriage not to go to strip clubs because I knew my wife considered it cheating. And while it happened, it wasn't something that I really tried my best not to do it. But somehow I thought porn was okay. And somehow I thought that having women strip and go on these live cameras was okay on these porn sites. And I continued to do that and fool myself into thinking that wasn't cheating and fool myself into thinking that was just fantasy. So I was watching porn and going on these cam sites where there's live women that weren't my wife getting naked and keeping it a secret from her. And the bottom line is, it had been like 6 months since I had last gone to a strip club or massage parlor or anything like that. And I thought it was better. I genuinely did. And I started telling my wife, I'm like, hey, I have some secrets to tell you, because I wanted to clear my conscience. And I told her about the campsites. And I said, I know you don't like strip clubs, but I found an alternative where it's like, it's not real. It's just on camera. And she was pregnant. And I'll just kind of give you the shorter version of it because it's a long story, but she collapsed when I told her. She fell to the ground and uncontrollably was shaking, like trauma, severe trauma. And she was pregnant with our son, Luke. And she was about 4 months pregnant. And she then started going into labor. She started having contractions. And so that was my rock bottom. We rushed to the hospital. And the whole way there, I'm just praying. I'm just, God, please, please don't take this baby. I mean, it's one thing to think you're hurting yourself or you're not hurting anyone. It's a whole nother thing to see you're hurting your wife. And it's a whole different level to think that you've murdered your child that's unborn because of your actions. And that's what I was thinking at the time. I was thinking that I literally was going to be responsible for the murder of my son because of the trauma that I put my wife through. And that was something that whether that happened or not, I knew in that moment that I would never be the same. And I went to God and I started praying and I said, God, please help me. I promise I'll do whatever it takes. And we get to the doctor puts the ultrasound device on, and it was like the longest, 15 seconds, 20 seconds of my life. And I just didn't think there would be a heartbeat. And he looks up and he said, I hear the heart. I'm like, thank God. What happened? What's going on? He's like, these aren't labor contractions. These are stress contractions. Your wife has been put under a huge amount of stress, and they gave her some kind of sedative. And, we stayed with her and calmed down. And that was the day I entered recovery. And that was February 13th, 2020. And since that time, I'm proud to say I haven't watched porn. I haven't gotten drunk. I haven't taken Adderall. I stopped taking Adderall in July of 2020, but I stopped Adderall. I stopped smoking pot, stopped gambling. I mean, all these vices that kind of woven together are no longer part of my life. And so I'd say sex was the Achilles. I originally went into recovery for sex addiction, but as part of being in recovery, I recognized other addictive behaviors and substances that I was still going to. And I focused also on getting clean from those. And that kind of took me to my spiritual journey of mindfulness and becoming a Christian. So it all kind of started with that, because I was so grateful that my wife was okay, that my son was okay. And I made a promise at that point. I'm like, I had no idea that I could cause this much pain. And I mean, that was like, I escaped death, not for me, but for Luke. So it kind of all blends together, but that was my journey. It like really started in 2007. So that would have been 16 years ago, but I didn't formally enter recovery until 2020.
Well, very, very powerful story, and what happened with your wife. And I think there'll be a lot of people listening to this that identify with some of these things, but want to change, but haven't made that change yet, whether it's like porn or alcohol or drugs. What advice would you give to those people that are listening to this, that identify with your situation, but aren't like you, that haven't, had this 2-3 years without it?
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I wish I didn't have to hit a rock bottom, but you almost always do hear about these rock bottoms when you go into the recovery rooms of, what caused people to change. But for me, it's those defining moments. I pray and I wish that you don't get to that point, because it's really painful, but that's where change occurs, is when Tony Robbins says change occurs when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. So I can give you the prescription, but before you even go there, you have to really be clear on the pain that you're in. What is this causing you? Who is it impacting you? Are you feeling shame? Is this a cycle that you can't get out of? Is this costing you time and money and confidence? And really get clear on why you want to change and what pain you're in, because that's what's going to make it real versus denial, right? Or rationalizing the addiction. Oh, I'm fine. I haven't crashed into a tree. I haven't, gotten to that point. Well, those are rational lies. That's what rationalize means. It means rational lies. And it's only a matter of time before you hit the rock bottom. So if you're aware that you're struggling, you probably know. And you probably have had those moments where you've gotten lucky and had some close calls, certainly like I did leading up to that. So if you're there, what I would say is, step one is like, why do you want to change? Really being aware of that. Step two is, I mean, this is step one of the 12 steps of recovery, but it's letting go and letting God, right? It's this idea that you can do it on your own. It doesn't work. If you could, you would have already done it. So you have to be humble enough to realize you have no control over this thing. This thing is controlling you. And that's step one, is came to realize that our lives have become unmanageable and that we could not control our addiction, right? That's the foundation. So again, that's kind of like, okay, I'm at a place now where I'm ready for recovery. Now, once you're ready and you really do want to get help, because I think a lot of people say they want to help, but they're not really ready. They still think they can do it. And they're still in this denial kind of stage. And I would say that's just so important. So that's where it starts. But once you are ready and you can't do it on your own, then you have to identify what is the biggest vice you're struggling with. So for me, it was sex. It wasn't alcohol, but alcohol certainly led to the sex, because a lot of times when I'd act out, it was when I was drunk, right? So the two went hand in hand. I say acting out, what I mean is compulsive sexual behavior, porn, masturbation, strip clubs, or whatever. So the thing that you struggle with, the main thing needs to be the main thing. Because once you deal with the main thing, all the other little things or the other addictive behaviors also you're going to become aware with, but you have to take care of the main thing. So if your main thing is cocaine, I would deal with, go with the Narcotics Anonymous or an NA group, right? Specifically for that substance. If your main thing is porn and sex, you would want to start with the, Sex Addicts Anonymous or a certified sex addiction therapist. They're called CSAT. That's who I started with. It's a therapist specialized in compulsive sexual behavior, certified sexual addiction therapist. If you Google CSAT in my area, CSAT in my city, you'll find ones that are, they have the title on Psychology Today. I can share the resource at the end, the website, but you can find people, but that all is getting help, right? So when you can't do it on your own, then you need to say, well, who can help me? And so for sex, there's certified sex addiction therapists. Other addictions have, specific therapists for those addictions. For me, it wasn't just a therapist. I also went to 12-step groups. So Alcoholics Anonymous, or maybe if your church has something, if you are Christian, or, you have to seek out. The beautiful thing is, if you want help, it's only a Google search away, right? There are literally meetings every hour on the hour for nearly every type of addiction, whether it's marijuana, gambling, sex, alcohol, doesn't really matter. There's going to be help. I'd say get your butt to a meeting. Go to a meeting, ideally live. Try to find a meeting in your area. If you can't find one live, go online and do a Zoom meeting. They're since the pandemic, they've really expanded the network of meetings to Zoom. But the real simple step is identify what it is that you're trying to be free of, and find the experts for that particular thing, right? So my thing was sex, and I found it CSAT plus Sex Addicts Anonymous, which helped me overcome this sex and porn addiction. And in doing that work, then I also recognized, hey, getting drunk isn't serving me anymore. I don't really want to do that. But because I had overcome the hardest thing, not getting drunk was like easy. I haven't had a desire to get drunk in 3 years since I gave up porn. Then I flushed my Adderall down the toilet. I'm like, this is also addictive in nature, based on the pattern of wanting to feel different and escape. So you start to like sit with yourself and be aware of the triggers, and you get this next level of spiritual awareness that comes from addiction recovery. And then you realize I need healthy ways of coping, which led me to prayer, to faith, to mindfulness, to long distance running, to connection with my wife, to sunsets, to walks on the beach. Now I have this whole entire toolkit of healthy, positive coping mechanisms that are really good for me and my family that I can go to, versus the de facto, the default of, fantasy or gambling or porn or whatever, the compulsive things that people normally go to. So that's where I would start is pick the thing that you want to start with, and start with one thing and really get the help from other people, because you're not alone in suffering and silence and thinking you're alone. You're actually fueling the fire of addiction. That's what the enemy wants you to think. That's what, when I see the enemy, I mean your selfish desires of the flesh that keep you in this state, versus living in a godly way. That's more purpose-driven and spiritual. And so there's like the two opposites, the angel on one side and the devil on the other side. And the battle's real in our heads. The battle is real. So what side are you going to choose? In order to go to one side, you have to literally turn completely away from the other side. And that's what I've done in my life.
Okay, so let's talk about, I like that analogy of like in your head, you've got like an angel and a devil like fighting each other. So you're talking around, you went to therapy, you did the 12 steps, and then, you got faith, prayer. Now, one of the reasons I set up this podcast is I see a lot of people that do a lot of the things you're talking around, go on more of a spiritual journey, in inverted commas, but then they don't implement that in their daily lives. So the question I'd like to ask is, when you're going through this and you've got these tools that are helping, how can you ensure that you're having like deep, meaningful change, that you're not just doing this to kind of tick a box, but you're actually doing it to like improve, your day-to-day life? And this is where the spiritual material kind of come together.
Yeah, I think this is something I've coined addition by subtraction. So if you want to go to the good things, go to the tools that are healthy that you could implement, you literally have to cut off the supply for the things that are your de facto dopamine inducing things that you would go to normally. So when I quit porn, I put filters on my computer. I put an app called Covenant Eyes, where I couldn't get to sites, and I made my wife my accountability partner. So if I ever tried to go to a porn site, she would get an alert. Well, that certainly deterred me, right? And I didn't. It was like, I'm not going to do this to her. I already traumatized her. I'm never going to do that again. The other thing that I did was I literally, when I stopped traveling, because that's when I had tendencies to like go to strip clubs or whatever. Or if I did travel, if I had to travel, I'd give my wife my ATM card and I'd bring like $20 or something. You have to make it so you can't access the thing that you struggle with. You really have to make it really hard versus easy. If you really want to, I tell people, like, if you want to quit pot, like get rid of all the pot in your house or the alcohol or whatever it is. And yes, technically you could restock, but tell the person not to sell, like blacklist yourself from the place you go, like make an effort and say like, I don't want to do this, or make it really hard to get the thing that you crave. You know what I mean? So I think when you start subtracting those things, then you have to sit with yourself. Then you actually have to sit with the feeling versus going to the medicine, because the medicine's not there. So when I got rid of my Adderall, for example, like I had to sit with the fact that I didn't feel like doing work, and Adderall was a rocket fuel that helped me get through the day. I had to sit through the fact that like I didn't like some of these things that I was resisting or procrastinating on, and I was using Adderall as a way just to like studying in college, just to like force yourself to get through it and cram, because you have that energy that you have to do something with it. So I just channeled it towards work. And once I stopped taking it, now it was like, oh man, my mind is spinning. How do I work effectively? So I started studying habits, and I bought the book, The 12-Week Year and Atomic Habits and The Power of Habit. And I realized the reason that I was so scatterbrained is because I didn't prioritize, and I wasn't time blocking, and I wasn't taking breaks. And so removing the thing that you struggle with actually forces you to sit with the feeling. And then once you sit with it, then it's like, okay, you start to be aware of the triggers that lead to wanting to go masturbate or wanting to go drink or whatever it is. And the triggers become, okay, I'm recognizing my body is feeling this way. I need a break. I need a walk, or I just need to stop messing around and do the thing that I'm avoiding because it's causing me stress, and that stress is making me want to medicate. It's usually like when you have to sit with your thoughts and your feelings, you can recognize when they come up, but now you don't have the thing to go to so quickly. Whereas in an addictive cycle, there's no space between the trigger and the response. You just go get that junk food, or you go get that porn site or whatever it is. And it's so fast, you don't even know what's going on. So a good book is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, I think it is, where it talks about the space between and this cycle of bad habits. And I'll lump addiction into bad habits because it's addictive tendencies. And so I think that's the start, is subtracting those things so you can sit with the feelings. And then the next part is like, okay, what do I do about it? So in sex addiction recovery, we have this, it's called outer circle activities, which are healthy, positive things that like the feeling that makes you want to go to the addictive behavior typically will pass, but it's when you give it thought and attention that makes it bigger. Okay. But if you recognize it's just a feeling and you do something to like breath work or meditation, or I just go inside the house and say hi to my wife and give her a kiss, or play with my kids for a little bit, typically that feeling goes away. So you need to identify the healthy alternatives that you can go to in those moments and really like spell it out. This is not like, oh, I think I know what I need to do. I spent months in doing recovery work and workshopping. Why do I need to change? What are the healthy activities? And I mean, there's so much that I do on a daily basis, but I'll give you kind of my recipe to avoid addiction on a maintenance basis. So I have a morning routine that I practice every day. And that morning routine consists of affirmations. It consists of prayer, and it consists of meditation and exercise. So in doing those things in the morning, I'm warming up my day. So by the time I start my day, I am present. I am feeling positive. I've gotten some wins. I feel rested. My morning routine starts with like getting a good 7 hours of sleep the night before and going to bed at a decent hour. So all of that builds up your armor against addiction. When you're tired, when you're weak spiritually, when you're not exercising, you're going to be susceptible to those addictive behaviors because you're not doing things that are good for your body. So at that point, you're like, screw it. What does it matter? I can just keep doing these things. But when you're doing things that are really good for your body and your mind, you're not going to want to poison it with toxins. Yeah. Okay. So that's the start of it. Then midday, I go and I have lunch with my wife every day from 12 to 1. I have lunch with her, and that's building connection. So that's kind of a break. It breaks up the day, and it's something that I prioritize no matter how busy I am. And then at nighttime, I turn off my work at 6 o'clock, and I'm with my kids, and I cook, and I'll watch a show with my wife, and I'll get to bed at a decent hour. And that kind of and we usually take a walk. And then on weekends, we take a trip. We do something nice as a family. We'll go to the zoo, or we'll go to the beach, or we'll go on the bikes. And we're always doing something, right? We're always doing something. So I'm filled with positive, healthy activities. I'm running a marathon in 2 weeks. It's my second marathon in 6 months. That gives me stuff to train with. So you have to have substitutes, that you have to have goals about health that you're going towards, or else the addiction is just going to keep. So it was for me, it's about replacing, it's about subtracting it, recognizing and building that awareness, and then replacing those activities with healthy, positive goals. And so this all kind of happened in a series to me, but I've been adding and adding and adding and adding since I've gotten sober. Once I've subtracted, it's given me so much more time, and I can add all these amazing things to my life. And now it's the point where I don't have enough time in the day to cover all the great things I want to do. So that's, I don't know. I know it's a very long answer, but that's what I'd recommend, is you get your goals and get clear on the other stuff you want, and then you're not going to want to hurt your body with the addictive cycle as much.
Yeah, it's awesome to see that transformation for you, Ian. I wanted to ask one last question here. So say going back to 2007, in some of your darker days, what advice would the 2023 Ian give to the 2007 Ian?
Get proper help. I mean, I knew I wanted help, but I thought sex addiction was this nympho. It's very misunderstood. It's mostly men who are just struggling with porn. I mean, that really is the bulk of those groups, or objectifying women. That's the bulk of those groups. And I would say most men would relate in some capacity to that. But I thought it was a bunch of nymphos that had were having anonymous sex in park bathrooms or something. So I kept saying, well, I'm not like those guys. That's not me, and honestly, I would tell myself to go to a CSAT and really get proper help. So, I mean, I wouldn't change a thing, to be candid, because that whole journey I needed to be on so I could be the man I am now. But I was trying to do it on my own. And then when I was getting help, it wasn't through domain experts. You really do need to find people that really understand what you're struggling with and are equipped. Not all therapists are the same, right? There's a lot of different specialty therapists. And so I think for me, I would have said, see a specialty therapist for sex and porn, and, versus just a general therapist. That's probably what I would tell myself. And then I would probably tell myself, I don't know. I mean, I'm so different. I'm a different person than I was there, but I'm I would tell myself, what do you get clear on what you want? Really, I was just in this place where all I wanted was to be the best and make a lot of money, but I didn't have goals. Those are not goals. Being the best and make a lot of money are not goals. So I would probably tell myself, start helping people. Everything changed when I started helping people, when I started coaching, when I started speaking on podcasts and sharing my story. It was so fulfilling versus just helping myself. I was so fucking selfish. And I want to share this, Michael, too. There was one other defining moment. I shared a couple with you, with meeting my wife and then rock bottom. But there was one, I had a near-death experience several years ago. And I got stuck upside down on a roller coaster for 30 minutes, dangling for 30 minutes, 180 feet in the air. And I thought I was going to die. And it was the scariest thing I've ever been through in my life. And in that moment, again, I prayed to God, and I said, what was crystal clear for me in that moment when I thought I was going to die was that if I died in that moment, my life would have been wasted, because I didn't use my gifts to serve other people. And that was what flashed before my eyes, is this massive awareness that I had been selfish my whole life. And hanging off that roller coaster, I just said, God, I promise I will not just take all these gifts you've given me and these crazy stories and these learnings and just keep them to myself. I'm going to start helping other people and sharing what I know to be true with the world. And that was kind of when my coaching business was conceived up on that roller coaster. And it didn't like turn into a formal business until a few years after that. But I started just by making videos and posting and trying to help people and share what I knew to be true. And then once I got into formal recovery, then it just took a life of its own. I really could help people in a much bigger way, like, like we're talking about. But, that awareness that if I died tomorrow, would I have lived the life I wanted to live? Like that is such a powerful reframe of, why are you doing the things you're doing? And it's something I have to go back to continuously over and over to make sure my life has meaning and purpose. And it comes from service. It comes from giving. It comes from helping and not making it all about you. And that's the big shift I'd say that I tell myself is stop making it about you, make it about other people. And the less you focus on yourself and what you want, the more you can get what you want through helping focus on other people. So that's been the key I always go back to, is like make it about loving your brothers and sisters and helping them be better. And you're going to get all that, your cup's going to be very full. You won't have that void. If you have God and you have service, I generally do not feel the void anymore. And I'm so grateful that I can be able to say that because it's taken me a lifetime to get to this point.
That's a great way to end the show. We'll put some links to your social media, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. Anywhere else that you wanted to send anyone listening?
If you want, I have a newsletter. I send out motivational videos, mostly on sales, but I talk a lot about addiction, and I talk about my faith. I talk about family and what to prioritize, health. So it's kind of a blend, but all those things are essential to performing your best in any field, sales, entrepreneurship, or otherwise. So I have a weekly newsletter I send out, a YouTube channel where I have a ton of videos, and LinkedIn. Those are probably the three places that I would point people. And if you ever want coaching, if you need life coaching or sales coaching or anything that I mentioned resonated with you today, you can go to my website. It's untapyoursalespotential.com, untapyoursalespotential.com, or just Google my name and it'll take you to that site.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Ian.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So what a journey Ian has had. What a roller coaster of a life. He's had a lot of financial success, but along the way, he's had a lot of highs, a lot of lows. And then this topic of sex and porn addiction, I think it's a really important thing to talk about openly. It's obviously a very difficult thing, but porn being more readily available than ever, there's millions, if not billions of people who are watching porn. And it's important that we know the damaging effects. And if you are someone that thinks you have a good problem, get help. Even if you want to speak to someone or go online, there's lots of resources that you can use. We'll put some in the comments. Really enjoyed the show today. If there's anyone out there who you think should listen to this, maybe who has porn or sex addiction or is going that way, feel free to send them a show. Subscribe to us on all podcast platforms and YouTube, and look forward to seeing you next week.